are finally getting to explore more of Italy, and this has given rise to this mini-series, which we're unofficially calling The Year We Went to Italy 4 Times by Accident. Yeah, so this wasn't originally the plan, and to underline, we could only do this because it shaped up to be so inexpensive. Sicily from last time we managed to do for just 35 quid, and in fact I had a voucher code left over, so that somewhat ridiculously knocked it down to just £15 there and back. Now, this Lake Garda trip, on the other hand, is something we'd booked all the way back in January 2020. And then nothing at all of global significance happened, not even a little bit. But those flights got cancelled, so instead we all just headed to Wales for a few days and saw Snowdonia, and it was great. But then the next year came around and, look, okay, it was 2022, okay? I often mask the exact year we do these trips because, it sometimes takes us a while to get these out. But the epoch in question was the year of our Lord 2022. There, I said it. To underline how inexpensive this was, we each flew out for 65 quid there and back. Now this is England, which is where we live, and no one needs to tell you that when it's cloudy and wet, you're not having a great time. I mean, sure, there's outliers like the Lake District or Cornwall, but they're kind of the exceptions that prove the rule. Wales and Scotland, by contrast, invariably look amazing with the right clouds. Anyway, you get it. Blue skies and sunshine, always preferable. So if I told you that our visit to Verona and Lake Garda was 100% cloud cover, you might think that would be quite the disappointment. And sure, it wouldn't be my natural preference, but as you're going to see, in a lot of ways, it was even more beautiful and made for an even more spectacular trip. This wasn't even our first glimpse of Garda. We were there all the way back in 2018, back when I hadn't even conceived of doing travel videos, so we took a lot of pictures, but no videos. However, we were basically just in the south, and much as Simeone and Desenzano were amazing, you could see from the mountains in the far distance to the north that the best was yet to come. But cutting away from Garda, to begin, we flew into Verona for the beginning of our 4-day weekend. It was only 2 hours from Gatwick and on one of the most deserted flights I've ever been on. I think we were barely scraping 20 people. This was late April, so not exactly high season. We breezed through Verona Airport and bus to the town, but close call, just make sure you get your tickets from this machine first. When you step off the bus at the station, it's not instantly apparent what there is to get excited about, but a short walk into Verona and all of a sudden, wow, well, that is a bridge. The historic centre of Verona is built on the sharp bend of the Adige River. It was a significant Roman town and has some incredible remains, including, and quite impossible to miss, this amphitheatre. But if you wanted the, that's why you're there, while Verona was a proud independent city throughout much of the Middle Ages, in 1405 it came under the Republic of Venice. Yep, there it is, he said the thing. So yeah, that was another excuse for us to be exploring here as well. I mean, as if you need one. The town is a luxurious showcase of Renaissance architecture, and the castle alone would make it worth a visit. We were actually a bit pushed for time. This was just a chance to briefly see the town before our train connection to Lake Garda. So dropped in for a quick coffee at a nice little place. We mostly avoided taking coffee or food in the main squares, as the rule is you sort of double the price while halving the quality. Just based on location, they'll still print money on passing tourists. A bit like Palermo, all of the waiting staff we encountered were really sweet, really patient and gracious about our absence of Italian, and if they found us irksome and clueless, they never once showed it. So we wove our way into the middle of Verona, where the nearly intact amphitheatre dominates a beautiful square. Wouldn't have time to see that just yet, but we'd be back later in the trip. And we pretty much needed to hot-foot it back to the station. A short train ride, we got out at Desenzano, which is one of the 2 major towns on the southern tip of Garda. It has a castle, but it's sort of hidden in between buildings. I know that sounds ridiculous for a castle on a hill, but seriously, there isn't much of a wide-angle view where you can get all of it in. However, from this height, we got our first look at the lake. This is all just desperately lovely. The waterfront of Desenzano is small but exquisite. So we needed to catch a boat, and we've been edging around this long enough, let's just confront it head on. By a quite remarkable fluke of nature, Lake Garda is an absurdly phallic lake. Not even because it's got a long, thin bit at the top, but it bulges out in some two places to the south, with the peninsula of Sirmione even differentiating the two testicular-like masses. It's a big penis doodle in the geography of North Italy, okay? It's just as simple as that. Let's all get the giggling out of the way now, shall we? Back to the boat trip. What's really refreshing is the boats are highly non-fussy. They're closer to just buses on the water. You just show up at the ticket booth, which are pretty much at every stop, and step on. So we were crossing the entire lake end to end, but the ferry doesn't just go straight from Desenzano to Riva. It bounces around the edges of the lake, stopping at a number of towns that line it. So this boat ride was quite the experience. It totaled just under 5 hours, which I know seems a bit much, but as a chance to see the entirety of the lake, it was brilliant. However, it's going to be hard to be concise. Actually, that's not entirely true. I basically have close to an hour of uncut footage, including some glorious long shots of 2+ minutes kind of tracking round. And while a disciplined editor would trim the very best 5% and bin the rest, I am a self-indulgent newbie who places too high an import on what amounts to little more than a passion project. So what we'll do, I think we need the mother of all supercuts to see the lake south to north. Before we move along, can we just appreciate how impressive it is that my guy can sleep through this? I mean, Jan has always had a genuine talent to be able to drop off in a car after like 90 seconds, but this is something else. Just listen to that. Now, no big shock, the mountains are the real highlight. I mean, the south of Garda is considerably flatter, but as you get north, it's really spectacular. Okay, so a little drowsy, and with the boat entirely to ourselves by this point, we stepped off into Riva. It is a fantastically exciting place to explore, as you'll see. I actually have a shot of this from above, from a previous flight. Yeah, there it is at the northern tip. There's lots of tight, mysterious streets, and despite its pretty tiny size, you seem to never quite be able to retrace your steps more than once. You always end up down a slightly different street by accident. We got to our Airbnb, which had lovely views over the rooftops. Headed out shortly after dropping our bags. Dinner in a not especially fancy restaurant, but actually really delivered with some solid pizza. So enjoyed the nighttime vibes of the square. In summer, I wondered that this might be packed so dense with people you'd have to crowd surf to exit. But as it was in April, the town was not deserted, but, pretty quiet. Now, when you're in a mountainous area, weather forecasting is tricky. Without getting into the weeds, the first day was supposed to be dry with rain on all the other days. But when the rain did materialise, it was almost always just a tiny bit of spitting, which disappeared after just a few minutes. Anyway, we had scaled back our ambitions for day 2. I was out the house at 6:45 exploring the streets of Riva, but we'd resigned ourselves to rain probably halting play. Oh, funny thing, by the way, woke up to an absolute racket outside our window. I couldn't figure out what was going on, like if someone was doing some building work at 6 a.m. Nope, garbage truck, just like spectacularly loud, and then complemented beautifully by a guy strolling around with a leaf blower. So, is the brass band and fireworks display now, or is that like more of a 7 a.m. thing? Anyway, quick espresso and surprisingly satisfying marmalade croissant from this low-key cafe just a few yards from our apartment. A little bit away from the main centre, there are some Roman ruins in Riva. The cover over them means they're not especially well lit, but cool to see. Then I roused the boys. We got espressos and pastries for breakfast, and also then another espresso shortly after that. And to get some better views of the town, we took the cable car, which is €6 return, and it gets you up here to this ruined Venetian tower, and to also easily the best views over Riva and the north of the lake. There's also a restaurant there, and based on the food prices, I was a little worried they might tell us to jog on if we asked to sit in just for drinks. But yeah, I was pleasantly surprised how unposh this restaurant in like the premium location was. I mean, you couldn't, for example, order dinner there for downwards of €15 a course, but they were very happy for us just to sit and have drinks and coffees. I mean, yeah, so absolutely do not miss going up here. Descended for a quick lunch and onto a boat again. Now, since the promised rain had not materialised just yet, we were heading to Malsasine, which, with its beautiful castle set up on the rock, absolutely steals the show at Garda. So, I mean, what else can you do but climb that castle? I mean, pretty much what you'd expect, perhaps other than this sniper rifle, which makes anime weapons look like Happy Meal toys. And wonderful views over the rooftops and low-angle flag shot. In fact, too much pretty footage not to have a supercut. The town of Riva is slightly more beautiful, but it's really too close to call, and you could of course have a spectacular time staying in Malsasine. I had penciled in a stop in Limone. We might have hopped off there, but time, weather, and just light was not with us, so we headed back to Riva. So, okay, we're in Lake Garda. It's not sunny, but it is still amazing, and the moodiness is just exquisite. We're drinking a lot of espresso, low-angle flag shot. It's a good time. A much cloudier start next morning with the gorgeous, moody mist kissing the mountain slopes. We had this rather puzzling back and forth with our host, who had shown himself to be rather fussy. It's tricky when you're trying to put someone at ease by assuring them that they don't need to do a bunch of things for you. Like, no, really, it's fine, no, really. But in a weird twist, he wasn't taking no for an answer, and like not in an endearing way, but in a rather pushy, obnoxious way. He was utterly incredulous that we would take a bus. I mean, a bus! The very idea! He kept saying, no, I must call you a cab. By the way, the bus turned out to be €2 and took 25 minutes. So, On reflection, he may have just been shilling for his mate's taxi firm and we didn't realise. Anyway, we had to politely extricate ourselves from the property and decline all his offers. We caught the bus out the north of Riva, through a mountain tunnel that appeared to last forever, and out the other side into a mist-covered land to eventually step off at Lake Ledro. Now, this is smaller than Garda by many orders of magnitude. There was a very particular Easter egg that I'd persuaded the boys to come and see. I will try and quickly summarise. From roughly the Neolithic to the Bronze Age, a culture existed around the Alps region which built houses on stilts in wetland areas. Held up on wooden piles, these are known as the pile-dwelling settlements, and they're pretty remarkable. As you can see from the museum on site, they were crafting and trading in beautifully rich artifacts, and these reconstructed structures overlooking the water are something else. I mean, goodness knows this needs a longer historical explanation. I mean, it's basically a whole episode. It's actually a little ironic. This summer, I'm going to be hitting several pile-dwelling sites such that we're going to be overflowing with footage of these incredible places, but for now, it was a real treat to be catching this. And quite apart from anything else, just having this stilt house framed against the mist over Lake Ledro, I mean, such a special morning to be there. So yeah, I'm resisting the temptation to put a supercut here. It's one for us to revisit properly in the future. So we linked back to Riva for a quick espresso and breakfast, then it was on the move again. This time we wanted to get where we were going a bit faster, so rather than the ferry or even one of the more expensive like fast ferries, we just opted for a bus around the eastern edge. And then it made most sense for us to link onto a boat from the town of Garda. We had just about half an hour to take a wander. I am sorry to say, considering this town is what the lake's named after, there's not a huge amount to get excited about here. I mean, the old town parts are, about as picturesque as the other towns around the rim of the lake, but there's no particular standout spot that makes it a must visit. Okay, so onto the ferry again. There was just a hint of blue skies that broke through above our heads, but that was pretty much all we got for the whole weekend. And before long, we came into sight of Sirmione. Now, if you didn't catch this, it's a long, razor-thin peninsula that extends out into the south of the lake. And while the south of Garda doesn't have the sheer slopes of the Alps plunging down into the water like in the north, it does have the more spectacular architecture and ruins. I mean, Sirmione is quite something. The first thing your eyes can't help but fix on is the castle that guards the entrance, which is severed by just a tiny channel that actually transforms the end of the spit into an island. You do actually get cars that cross this and then attempt to weave through the solid mass of people in streets barely wider than a drinking straw. The streets are almost all cafes and gelato shops. I mean, it's probably the highest ratio of kilograms of gelato to humans per square kilometre that you'll find anywhere. Quick espresso and lunch. I feel it's not unfair to say that Sirmione is suffering from over-tourism and, well, hey, it does seem like you boys are kind of adding to that problem. Yeah, like a lot of places that have an uncomfortably high footfall, it's not hard to see why. I mean, take out the crowds, and this does have a feel almost like a movie set. And when you add in the lakeshore and the castle... Speaking of Skellige Castle, I will admit, even though it was great to see this again and actually climb it this time, this was pretty much the only time in the weekend that I was really bummed out about having no sun. When we were here last time, we actually had the colour, but, not a lot of time spare to go in. Yeah, you know what? Quick supercut, actually. Heading to the very end of the peninsula, something else I was really pleased to see properly this time. This was a Roman villa, and yeah, no surprise that this would be a place to build a high-status structure. However, this has quite the story following its post-Roman abandonment. You can see from the water that the surviving arches have an uncanny quality of, wow, what am I looking at exactly? They became known as the Grotti di Catulo, or the Grottos of Catulus, thanks to their resemblance, in their ruined state, to caves. You might need to picture this pre-restoration, I don't know. Funnily enough, despite the enormity of the sites, when you first enter, it does a very good job of communicating to you, there's nothing to see here, you've been had. And then suddenly you get to the end, it's like, oh, psych, here's these ruins and these arches about 4 stories high. Yeah, they're incredible. It's quite the showcase of Roman engineering. Not that we probably would have wanted to swim, but actually pretty annoyed that they closed off Jamaica Beach. not sure this is the best facsimile of the Caribbean, but it's a pretty cool spot. I'll talk about it another time. I mean, I can't think of a beach where you'd be more likely to injure yourself, but hey, if you've seen the last few episodes, perhaps I'm not the best control for that experiment. Brief espresso and snacks. As we wandered back, the rain started making more concerted efforts, so we trundled out of the old town to catch a bus. I don't know what to tell you other than the bus system from Sirmione is a massive lie. The times they give you don't really seem to comport with anything. It's kind of boring to even talk about, but basically, you get a shuttle that does loops back and forth down the peninsula, and it dumps you at a sort of nowhere spot to just sort of hope a bus shows up to actually take you somewhere that matters. So that kind of sucks. For context, I have zipped every which way around North Italy on trains and buses. They are normally prompt and comparatively frequent, so this was an anomaly. Worse yet, in a day where we'd navigated a bunch of public transport changes pretty adeptly, we lost something like 2 hours just getting the short distance to Peschiera, at which point it was dark and raining. So yeah, it was annoying not getting to see anything in the evening. We decamped to this hostel, which was pretty great actually. Clean, fun design, not much to say other than that. Headed out to a restaurant, and twist ending, it was bad. Lasagna tasted like it was something from a school cafeteria. I mean, it filled a gap, but pretty shoddy stuff. In fact, turned out I didn't even bother filming it. I just filmed the seafood choices the boys got. But, fine, whatever. It was now properly raining as well. The whole weekend it sort of leaned on the idea of raining hard, but without really committing, whereas now it was actually going for it. Well, early rise, and I was fortunate. The rain eased off just as I was leaving the hostel, and despite the dramatic clouds, was able to see Peschiera. And this place is fascinating. It's almost certainly unlike anywhere you've ever been. These are a series of large-scale Venetian bastion defences bounded by these emerald green waters. Now, this is not a colour retouch in the edit. They really look like that. It's rather a striking change of pace from really anything else on Garda. It's probably not what most people picture when they want to stay somewhere here, but I was loving this, mainly as a remarkable example of Venetian defensive structure. So we're going to be going into this more before too long, and hey, I'm going to make a not even remotely subtle plug. Here's the Venetian Republic playlist so far, give it a watch, we'll be expanding it before too long. But had to keep it brief, could only spare about 90 minutes before we checked out the hostel and got on the train to Verona. The rain was back, so we trudged into a cafe for a coffee, and then headed to the main square. Having not had time to actually go in the amphitheatre on our brief stop in Verona on day one, this was our chance. But even with all the rain, the queues were still pretty huge, and the ticket office was showing a spectacular lack of urgency. It was about 25 minutes in the rain just to move 20 yards. And the inside? Well, someone should probably be in jail for this. I mean, the reviews had hinted as much, but you have to work hard, like really get up early in the morning to ruin such a significant historic monument this badly. And for €10 to get into what essentially looks like a second-rate baseball pitch? I'm actually all for historic theatres being used to host events, but not if you're just going to dump tons of red plastic in the middle and then charge €10 entry. Actually, I forgot I got lucky. I was wearing a Bournemouth Uni hoodie this holiday, and the lady just charged me what I think was the student rate without finding out that I was actually and graduated, a long time ago. When I got out, the queue had more than doubled in length. So, tempting though it is, can I rather strongly advise against going into the amphitheatre? It's kind of just a €10 kick in the nuts with a 45-minute queue in the rain. The only thing worse you can do, this is like a bad joke. This is the queue for Juliet's balcony, with parentheses large enough to crush a car. Why exactly do people want to queue round the block and pay for a historic site from, wait for it, a fictional story? Did people really think that Romeo and Juliet is like King Arthur? Like it might have some basis in fact? So yeah, avoid. And the thing is, the squares around there are gorgeous. You can lose yourself in the splashes of Renaissance Baroque, Venetian Gothic, and just about everything in between. So yeah, please, Verona is amazing. You don't need to go to Juliet's balcony. It's such a waste of time. Quick coffee at the cafe next to the cathedral. The boys have been on the cappuccinos all weekend, despite my best efforts to pass them espressos at every opportunity, so I caved and ordered myself both. The espresso was fine. Couldn't really taste the coffee in the cappuccino. I mean, it seemed to be well made and all, but it just tasted like a mug of warm milk. I guess I deserved that. So I told a tiny lie at the beginning of the episode when I said this trip was 100% cloudy because at the last possible moment, just 45 minutes before we had to leave Verona, the sun came out. I mean, I know it's not technically possible for the sun to be sarcastic, but it sure did feel that way. So just time to walk by the river, see the quite heavily restored Roman arch of Arco dei Gavi, and then past the castle again, but this time under blue skies. A quick gelato, and then we loop back to the station, bus to the airport, and that's a wrap. Oh, small asterisk. Verona is a pretty badly designed airport. Once you've queued through a tiny choke point of passport control, you're in a minute space with only a few chairs and no refreshments except a vending machine. So once through security, don't be too hasty to also go through passport control, even though there probably will be a sizable queue, so you'll have to judge it carefully. But we're out of here. Parting shot of the lake. So I feel like I already gave this conclusion away. I loved this. It's a really special place, even in clouds and spitting rain. And we were lucky that we avoided downpours, and that close to the Alps, there's no time of the year where you're absolutely guaranteed sun wall to wall. I mean, there's of course much better odds in June through August, but at that elevation and cold air, you may also be in for thunderstorms. Here's the thing, all the small Garda towns, they all sit in this unusual place where they're, yes, exquisitely picturesque, and also kind of very similar to each other. So you can just vibe in the narrow streets, and it's so unique and a great escape, but at the same time, not really having much to do other than patronising one cafe after the next. If you're rich, I'm sure there's a world of private boats launched from private jetties and meals €100 per course, but for the rest of us, while Garda isn't cheap per se, it's also far from unreasonable, versus, for example, the cost of things in the UK. So yeah, do it. Flights into Verona stay pretty low, flights into Milan are pretty cheap all year round. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. As I mentioned, do check out the Venetian Republic playlist, as well as the other episodes on Italy. We've got more coming next time. Otherwise, if you've enjoyed the music in the background, that's ours. We make all the music for these episodes, and you can catch it on bandcamp.com. If you want to support the channel, that's the place to do it. Otherwise, find us on all the socials, and we'll see you again next time.